Right, back with you again. I've undone the head bolts and the two on the timing chest cover. One little thing I thought might be worth noting is you'll sometimes see these oil drain pipes are all twisted. That's because when you undo this pipe, the union comes out of the cylinder head. So if you just use two spanners to crack it so it doesn't damage itself. What we'll do now is we'll just put something between the back of the head and the bell housing in there to lever the engine off. Lever the cylinder head off, because the gasket will obviously be well stuck. Oh, not too bad actually, he says. Pull this off and we'll have a look at the head face and decide whether it's a goer, whether the block looks okay, whether it's been studded with water in it. I did check it turned over before I selected it. So that's the cylinder head off. So first, oh, look at that. It's mint. Someone put a gasket on this recently. Well, recently, last time it ran. Right, I'll just pull the camera off so we can get a bit closer and see what's going on. Right, so we can see that this gasket's been replaced at some point. That's definitely not the original. Pull it off and have a look. And that looks like it's been planed as well. And the best bit is there doesn't appear to be any corrosion around these little oval parts here where the water passes through the block. If the engine's had no antifreeze, then it really erodes them, and then it becomes very hard for the engine to work and seal properly because there's no land for the head gasket to seal. Also, if you look inside the hole there, we can see that the port floor of the exhaust port, which is there, is actually silver, which means that it's definitely had some good antifreeze. Now if you move to the block, what we're looking for before you go any further with these blocks is we're looking for the edges of the aluminium to have fallen off, so there's nowhere for the gasket to sit. Now this one is quite healthy. I can see that the aluminium is intact all the way around, and the other thing to do, of course, while you're inspecting your engine before you put any money or more time into it, is being an old engine and having cooling issues, they didn't always have antifreeze in them. So if they've had any expansion issues, they tend to crack around here. Now the cracks are normally backed up by a water stain, hence why I cleaned this engine, and I did inspect it to make sure that there was no cracks in the block, because there's not a lot you can do with them really. I mean, they're not scrap, but if you put the heat into them to weld them, they pull all shapes. So yeah, it's better to start with a non-cracked block. So looking at this just briefly, I'll clean it up obviously and report back, but it does look like it's a goer. Looks absolutely fine. A few watermarks on the board, which doesn't concern me really. We will possibly pull a piston out and have a look, make sure the rings aren't gummed up, etc. But that's not really the concern of this video. This video is about doing the head gasket. Okay. Okay, I've just cleaned up the face of the block using some 240 grit emery paper, or wet and dry should I say, and then I've got it wrapped around a piece of steel. This is a flat plate really, but what this allows me to do is I get a witness mark when I'm rubbing it on the face of the block. It's always going to hit the high parts first. So you end up, if you've ended up with an imp engine that's had a really bad time and it's been overheated a lot, all the liners end up low. Not a massive amount, but it reflects when you come to look at it after you wipe it down, as in these parts here, especially in the centre, this is always low. So the emery cleans up this part of the block, no problem, but doesn't really touch here. But on this engine we can see it looks like it's cleaned everywhere, so that's a good start. Now if you haven't got a faceplate, you can just clean the engine with a blade, get the carbon off, and then you know, like a Stanley blade, scrape all the carbon off, and then use some wet and dry, and just get a little block of wood, something, you know, a couple of 3 inches long, and you can just rub it, try and give an even load. But when you come to check it, I like to use a torch. You can use a feeler gauge, that's the proper way to do it, but the torch is a really good way of getting an accurate look as to whether anything's low. So you can see it's touching all the way across off the block. If I lift it ever so slightly, you see the light oozing out. So we can see that the liners are absolutely dead flush with the top of the block. So this engine is in good shape in that department. Whilst I'm here as well, I just thought I'd make a little note because I forgot to in the last video. You see this little O-ring groove here next to the oil way. There's an O-ring that sits in there, and that feeds the top of the cylinder head with oil from the bottom half of the engine. So it's very important that we put a new O-ring in and make sure it's seated properly when we put the head back on, which I will talk about when we come to do that. Okay. Okay, so we just pulled all the studs out of the head and the spark plugs, a few of the hoses that were hanging around. You've probably seen that on the time lapse just then. The plugs were really tight, so if I'd known they were that tight, I would have soaked them in WD-40 the night before, but thankfully they've all come out okay. So the next thing we're going to do now, before we clean it all, is take the valves out, because we want to replace the valve guard oil seals, because the rubber goes really hard over the time, and the oil heat cycles, etc. So they stop doing their job and allow oil to pass down the guide, and then the engine smokes on overall mainly. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to undo the thermostat housing. While the head's off and the engine's out, even if you've got a new stat in it, I recommend you take it out and grease the studs and make sure everything's clean and clear, because when it's in the car, it can be a bit of a awkward job to get the thermostat housing off. So I'll bring this round to here, get a socket, and we'll undo it and see if the previous owner has took the time to grease the threads to make our job easier. Well, the thread, that doesn't feel fantastic, it's quite tight. Personally, I like to run a 74-degree thermostat in Imp, just to give it that little bit of a safety margin on a hot day. Obviously the cooling system is a bit marginal, but with the use of these modern 4-row and high efficiency cores they put in the old Imp rads, they're not so much a problem anymore. But I've always found that in a standard Imp, well, years ago when you could do more than 70 mile an hour, if you pinned it 85 all the way down the motorway, after about half an hour, the temperature would start to creep up a little bit, and you get a bit nervous and back off. But of course now, you're lucky if you get to 65 mile an hour, so it won't be a problem. Right, so we just want to get something between there and there, just to lever it. Oh. Right, that looks well and truly stuck. So what we'll do is we'll put a bit of WD-40 in it now, get the washers off, and what I'll do is after I've steam cleaned it, I'll put it in the barbecue, get it hot, and then there's a chance that the housing will come off then. It looks like a good housing apart from that. We could just start trying to wedge using the taper on the screwdriver to push between the gasket faces, but it makes a bit of a mess, and there's just a chance it'll come off with a bit of heat and a bit of lubrication, so we'll do that first. Anyway, right, so put them over there. What we'll do now is we'll take the valves out. Now this is a really simple operation. You have two collets that hold the caps in position. If you buy a valve spring compressor off eBay, then you'll have no problem at all in removing the valves. Now this is a valve spring compressor that unfortunately it was just a cheap 20 quid one off eBay. This was cast originally and it broke when we tried to use it on something with strong springs, so it's been remanufactured, but it's the same principle. So you can buy a valve spring compressor. I prefer these with the thread over the ones with the lever because it's a bit springy, and with an Imp they're so friendly. They've got no seat pressure, so you can just literally do it by hand, or actually just spanner, or you can use a buzz gun if you're in a rush. In fact, we'll use the buzz gun because it'll be quicker for the video. So all you do is apply it on, apply a bit of tension, and then break the seal where the taper sits with the collet. We'll flip the two collets out, and what I'll do is I'll get the camera and show you what I'm doing in a minute. There you go. They're just falling out now. We'll take all the valves out. We must, the springs and the caps don't necessarily need to go back in the same order, although it's good practice to keep everything in the order that it came off. But the valves, most definitely, we could do with keeping them in the same position because that could affect our valve clearances. I'm hoping that when it's all clean and we're giving it a quick lap, once put it back together, clearances should be quite close. We'll have to do loads of re-shimming, which will also go through this video. Right. Okay. So we can see here all the guides are good. Bit of play in that one. Got loads of cap at the back of the valve, etc., but that's just from being hanging around. What we're looking for is signs of moisture on the back of the exhaust valve. What happens is, if the head gasket's been blown, you get a lot of moisture in the engine, and then it eats, I don't know if it's a carbon thing or whatever, but always the back of the exhaust valve, you see all little craters where the water's eating in, and when that happens, they're in real bad danger of the head falling off. So if you see any with pitting on the back of your valves, just replace them. But this looks like it's okay, to be fair. Guys aren't bad at all. I'll be fine with some seals in. So just to go through there, you see the cap sits on top, then we have two collets and they sit in that groove. One goes there, one goes there, they go together, and then as the cap obviously has the spring tension behind it, so the spring's constantly pushing that way so that it can never release. You go up and down all day, but it will never release the collets unless you've got really bad valve bounce or something, but that's another story. So real simple operation. We're going to get all this cleaned up now and then we'll put it back together.